Well, I am thrilled to have another awesome guest with me here today. Another phenomenal drummer and well-rounded musician, actually. Gus Rios. So, Gus, how we doing, man?
Pleasure to be here, man. Good. Just always stoked to chat with like-minded folks.
Right on. Well, it's awesome to have you on here, and it's generally the way I like to run things is don't think of it as an interview. Think of it more as we're just going to have a conversation. So if you wander off topic, that's all the better. Just talk to me about what's on your mind, and if the conversation goes somewhere else, I'm totally cool with it. So first thing, just kind of tearing into your personality a little bit. Um, you seem like a very driven individual. So someone who's always got to be doing something, right? So your musical projects, it seems like sometimes there's multiple stacked on top of things, and you've got multiple ways to outlet, from being a drummer to a guitar player to doing some vocal work. So kind of fill me in about your personality a little bit.
I think a lot of that is probably, it's a way to shut this up, because if I'm always doing something, then I'm not just sitting I'm not just sitting around thinking about something. And it just kind of keeps I don't know, I guess I'm like a shark. A shark always has to move or else it just dies. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably some of it. And I think the other part of it would be that I just love so many different kinds of music that, if I had all the time in the world, I would have even more projects and things. Like, I'll listen to a thrash record and be like, fuck, man, I want to write a thrash record. And then I'll listen to some grindcore and be like, damn, I want to do a grindcore record. I just love doing, as I don't know, I just love doing it. I just want to make music. It's just in me to
Sure.
do it.
Right. Do you find that as you've gotten older, those urges have gotten a little stronger?
Yes, for sure. And
I have as well.
I think psychologically, um, I don't know, especially I'm 48 years old, so it's like the hourglass is definitely tipped over.
Right.
And, while I can, kind of a thing. And, and my wife she reminds me often, she's like, you tend to spread yourself too thin. And I do notice that, you know, if you really want something to be successful, you do have to give it, a fair amount of your attention for it to succeed. I'm fortunate. I mean, beyond fortunate that, like the Left to Die thing, that I'm a part of it. And that's something that my end of that bargain was just learn the material, which, I've been listening to Death since 1987. There wasn't any learning curve, and just recreate it live to the best of my abilities. I don't really have to, there's no rehearsal, there's no social media, it's not like a band that I have to put a lot of time into, as far as like what you have to do when it's like your own new band or whatever.
Hmm.
For instance, like I do this Depeche Mode tribute thing. That takes, a ton of time and effort and dedication and so forth and so on to see that move, because you have to be the one pushing. Playing Death songs kind of sells itself, so to speak. So
Sure.
and even, even Gruesome, um that's kind of like an original band, and obviously I use it in quotation because it's not very original music, but we are our own band and we write technically our own songs, so it's like you kind of have to give that more oomph than playing with Rick Ross and Terry Butler.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the Growl Podcast. If you are a fan of all things metal, subscribe to the channel, like this content, share it on your socials, help us spread the word. Right. Which is very, very cool. Um, I'm assuming the gruesome stuff kind of obviously was the gateway and the catalyst for your position in Left to Die.
100%. I mean,
Ye
me and Matt talked about this on the last tour, like the position that we have found ourselves in from this ridiculous drunk idea that we both shat out one night. Gruesome on paper is this ridiculous idea. It doesn't really make any sense. And when I explain it to my regular, civilian friends, if you will, then they're like, "What do you mean you're a tribute band, but you write your own songs?" I'm like, imagine that there was a band that was like the Beatles, but they wrote new songs that sounded just like Beatles songs. And they're like, I guess.
It works. It really
So,
does work, and it
I
has since day one for you
well,
guys.
and that was it's like shooting craps. Like um, you never know if it's going to work or not. I mean, and to me, that it's the same thing every time Gruesome puts out a new album. Like you never sit back. At least I don't sit back and think, "Oh, our fucking shit doesn't stink." Like you're always, and again, in particular with Gruesome, because you're trying to recreate, so to speak, these iconic records, and so you're already in a ring with Mike Tyson every single round, and you got to just try to stay in the ring, so to speak. At least that's how I view Gruesome. And like the new record is supposed to stack up, so to speak, to Human, which I
Right.
think is impossible. But we gave it everybody in the band gave it 110%. Like we all knew, okay, this is really the put up or shut up album. So,
Right. It's very
and
brave, because it's as you stated, it's the bar is high. I mean, you're going up against one of the most iconic metal records of all time, and you're either going to get chewed up and spit out, or you're going to walk out with a pretty solid respect level. And I think you guys managed to do the latter. I will say with Gruesome, it's one of those bands that you hear a lot. No, it doesn't even matter what band it is, right? Because you can take and say, oh, there's always those people who love to just talk shit. That's just what they do. And I personally have heard nothing negative about Gruesome. And for what you guys do, it's I mean, I'm not surprised because it's good, you know what I mean? But it's when you sit back and think of the concept like you talked about, it's like, well, it's pretty brave because there's a lot of people who covet that music.
well, I think, that's a great point. But I think if there's anything I can say on our behalf, which which is completely true, you'd be hard pressed to find individuals who covet that material more than we do.
Right.
I mean, me and Matt and I, um, yeah, Matt learned to play guitar with death riffs. So did I,
Mm.
and and in particular with this album, from the drum perspective, I mean, there's no drummer that I hold at a higher esteem than I do Sean Reinert.
Right.
Um, both artistically and personally. You know what I mean? Like I love that guy like a brother.
Right.
Um,
Let's talk about that for a second because I know I know I've seen that through your socials several times, and I know that relationship meant a lot to you. Um, let's talk about how you guys met and what your relationship, that friendship was like, and how it influenced you.
um, back in 1996, and I got to kind of preface the story by in 1995, I started studying with Dave Kulross, who was in Malevolent Creation at the time, and Dave was definitely the one who instilled in me all of the proper technique and, what I consider to be like the correct way to approach the instrument. And I think that's incredibly vital to point out because I don't think that Sean did not like giving drum lessons, first off. And in particular, I think if he would have met me just the year prior, that version of me, that player I was prior to my lessons with Cool Ross, he would have been like, "Yeah, dude, you're not really ready to even tackle these concepts."
Mhm.
So, having studied for a year with Dave, and by the time I had met Sean, I had fairly sound technique. I was working at a drum store. I was fairly knowledgeable. And this kid comes in at said drum store, and he's wearing a Cynic shirt. And I was like, holy shit, man, that guy's my favorite drummer in the world. And I know that, he's from Miami. So, um, I know they're local, so to speak. And this kid says to me, oh, the drummer is a substitute teacher at my school sometimes. And I went,
No way.
holy shit. I said, dude, I'll give you like free sticks for a month if you can get me this guy's phone number and I can study with him. So yeah, a couple days later or whenever, at some point later, he came back and he had a phone number, and I called him up and I said, "Hey man, I'm that guy. I work at Ace Music. Whatever." He came down to the store, and I remember I was just all awestruck and flattening of emotions and cosmic sea and lack of comprehension, all that. And he honestly said to me, he goes, "Hey man, if you just want to learn like licks, you can just listen to the CD. Like if you want to study and become like a better player, then I can help you." Which kind of set the tone right from the get go. Like, hey, I'm not here to fuck around.
Right.
And I would drive down to where he lived down in which was like an hour and a half south of me. And we just kind of hit it off as friends. Like we, back in those days, we both smoked a ton of weed, and we would just, we would study, do the lesson stuff. And then I remember I would just say to him, like, dude, can I just watch you play? Like, because he lived in his warehouse with his drums and his two dogs,
Mhm.
um, named Carcass and Thelonious. Um, and because to me, drums was the kind of instrument that if you know what to look for and technique, you can learn an awful lot just by watching somebody play.
100%.
And
100%.
I would argue that what Sean played that instrument more eloquently than anybody else I've ever seen. Like he was just watching him play drums was like watching water pour out of a glass. That's how I always described it. And we just became real good buds. And I like booked his first drum clinic because he was so humble that his in his mind he was just convinced that the whole world had already forgotten about him. He's like, oh, whatever. Nobody even remembers that death record. I remember this is 1996. There's no internet. There's no way for him to take the temperature of the drum community at large. And I
Sure.
was like, dude, you have no idea. Like you're still worshipped as like the god around, you're still like the guy. And I booked his first drum his first drum clinic, and a bunch of people showed up, and I just remember looking at him and going, dude, told you. And he moved to California, and years later I flew to California to see a band called Paradise Lost, who's one of my favorite bands. And I'd call him and I was like, hey man, can I stay with you, whatever. And so he picks me up at the airport, and I remember he closed his trunk. I threw my bags in his trunk, and there was a big old rainbow flag sticker, and he just looks at me and he goes, yeah dude, I'm gay. And I honestly looked at him and I went, I don't give a shit, man. Like,
Yeah.
let's go eat
So what?
out.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think honestly, maybe one of the reasons why we became so close is I was probably one of the first uh, people to really just accept him for who he was. And, that's kind of always been my thing with, gay or people or whatever. Like, I don't really give a shit what you do. Like,
Right.
as long as you don't hurt anybody else, I could care less what you want to do with your life. And I just respected him so much as a player. Like, it didn't affect anything. And if anybody had ever met Sean, like, dude, Sean was just like a dude. Loved basketball, like, was like, what's up, dude? Like, he was just a bro.
Right.
And, just super cool dude. And, we I ended up touring with Cynic. I ended up touring with him and DTA. And, we just became like siblings. Like, I was closer with him than I was my own actual siblings. Um, his passing uh, for me was uh, cataclysmic. And I
Right.
realized at that moment, wow, I have not only lost my closest friend, but my hero, my musical North Star.
Mhm.
I mean, I didn't even want to play drums at all. Like, I just, and in a way, I will say it reconnected me with guitar. And, it's strange how life works out that way, but and I'd always been a singer and I'd always been a guitar player. I just focused on drums for 25 years of my life. And then when he passed, I just didn't want to play drums anymore. And I just started playing guitar nonstop. And then the pandemic came. Um, and I just knew that if I pivoted, because locally here when I'm not on tour, because spoiler, playing death metal doesn't fucking pay the rent. Um, I make a living, playing weddings and bars and shit as a cover band guy. But I'd always done it as a drummer, and now I do it full time as a guitar player singer. So, and and it's way more consistent work, and I don't have to rely on anybody, and I can just play gigs by myself. So it's been incredibly financially liberating to go that route. So, you know, it's been 5 years. Uh, I used to not even be able to talk about this without getting all, emotionally fucked up. So, to even be able to talk about it now is, and just to have the conversation is sort
Mhm.
of, and this is one of the things that, the new Gruesome record, um, I remember, because the way when Savage Land was, quote unquote successful, we had a conversation like, well, shit, what do we do now?
Right.
Uh, and I think it was Matt that suggested, well, why don't we just start album by album, and we just kind of write a bunch of songs are based on this each particular records. So I knew, back in 2016 or 2015 or whatever, Human was on the horizon. At some point, I
Or
was gonna have
yeah, you knew it was
I was,
coming.
I was gonna have to climb this fucking mountain at some point. And to that point, I had called Sean in November of 2019, because at that point we'd already kind of finished the whole tour cycle for Twisted Prayers. And, our sights were now set on this next record. And I was like, dude, I'm fucking terrified. You kidding me? I'm not that kind of player. I'm just not. And, spoiler alert to everybody that hears this podcast, I'm not as good as a drummer as Sean Reinert. But good luck finding me one. Um, but I can tell you that, um, anyway, but going back to, I digress. I had called him and I said, hey, dude, I fucking need your help, um, with this album. And in true bro fashion, Sean says, well, what do you need me for, dude? You're the death metal guy now. Like, I should, you can tell me what to do. And I was like, yeah, man, no, you're still the you're still the Jedi, dude. I'm I'm the Padawan over here. And and obviously we laughed, and he was like, "No, of course, come over when the demos are done, and we'll come up with drum parts together." And that was November of 2019. January 2020, he passed away. So, um, it took me shit 3 years or so before I could even be like, "Hey, you know what? Let's start working on this again." And I went through phases where I was like, "I can't do this." I was going to call Mike Heller. I was going to call Longstreth. I was going to call the tech guys.
Sure, sure.
And and you get by with a little help from your friends, man. I'm very, very fortunate to call so many great drummers my good friends. And I talked to Dirk Verburen, I talked to Derek Roddy, Charlie Corin, Mike Heller, Longstreth, all these dudes. And the overwhelming response was like, "Dude, this is your album to make. Sean was your bro. You have to do this." And man, I spent probably 5 months once the demos were done being written, just playing the shit out of my drums, and just to feel like, you know, even if I just play like me, which in the end that was my approach. I just heard Sean's voice in my head, "Dude, just be yourself," and that's what I did. But it needed to be the best version of myself possible, and at 47 years old at the time, to accomplish that, my body was like, "Dude, we're trying to play drums like a 19-year-old kid from fucking Miami," because Sean was
Right.
19, human.
Which is just crazy, absolutely crazy.
He's just
Dif
full of piss and vinegar and had something to
Yeah.
prove and blah. And I'm just like fucking this old horse trying to keep up. But, um, Tama sent me these new Dynasync pedals, which are direct drives. And, going to a conversation I had with Dirk Verburen, and he's like, "Hey, they help me out a lot. I think they'll help you out. They don't feel like the weightless other direct drives. They still have some meat on them, and you feel them under your foot." And so Thomas sent me a pair, and I love them, and they definitely feel like they gave me a little edge, because the thing about a human that's physically demanding is just the sheer amount of double bass.
Mhm.
And there's more double bass on this Gruesome record than anything I've ever done, by a mile. And it's not that it's super fast, it just goes on for so long. And every song, there's just these giant sections of endless double kick, it feels. And, you know, I'll say this too, we didn't edit shit. I still adhere, to the old school ethics of you do it for real. Um,
Right.
I
I
just,
think you can completely tell. You can
well,
tell the difference when someone edits the shit out of something and when there's a natural flow to it.
I mean, I think so, number one. And number two, and this is just, and I'm not going to sit here and throw shade on anybody else. Like, whatever you do with your music, same thing with if you're gay or not. Like, it doesn't affect my life. I don't give a shit what you do. But me, I still, have self integrity, and I
Mhm.
have to this record the rest of my life, and I have to live with it the rest of my life.
Right.
And again, is it the fastest thing in the world? By today's standards, it's fucking dad rock. But I can listen to that record and know, hey, no, literally not one note of that shit was edited or fixed. So
Mhm.
I, and And also, Sean would have, Sean was way against that shit too. Sean didn't even like sampling drums over his drums. Like, he was an all natural guy. And, and I could just hear him, hey man, fucking, if you're going to do this, you know, do me right, man. Play this shit for real. And, so that's one, that there's no cutting and pasting vocals. There's no cutting and pasting guitars. Like, everything is done, the way it used to be. The computer was only used basically as a tape machine, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So, by hearing you talk about this, it almost seems like so many. Well, there's a handful of times in everybody's life where you got to make a really tough decision, and a lot of times that tough decision is the hardest decision to accept. Right, the thing that you have to do is going to be very difficult. But for this situation, for you, it seems like it kind of brought you full circle to pay homage to, probably one of the best friends that you've had in the best way possible. So as hard as that chore seemed and the weight that it seemed to be on your shoulders, I think if I was to guess now that it's all said and done, it probably feels pretty damn good.
I mean, um, even in the studio when I finished the last song, and the way I did this record is I recorded every single song 4 times, and we just try to use. I was pretty adamant about I want to keep you know as much of each take, whichever one of the 4 I think was best. And Jared, our producer, engineer, he was just, the only thing we did is like, he'd be like, hey man, I really like this drum fill, on this one or whatever. So like, like we swapped out a fill here and there, but the bulk of each song was one take. So when I was done with that 4th pass of the last song, I had a pretty significant emotional breakdown. And I mean, even thinking about it now makes me emotional. But yeah, it was just this like, holy shit! There was a sense of, obviously, a sense of relief. This feeling like you were staring at Mount Everest, and you're like, I can't climb this, I can't climb this, I can't climb this, and you climb it, you come down the other side, and you look back, and you're like, holy shit, I did this. Um, there was I was using the snare drum that Sean used to record Focus, so I felt like Sean was in the room. Um, yeah, there was just this a real sense of accomplishment and a real sense of like, I did my bro justice.
Right.
Not that it needed justice, but for me, um, I don't know if there was like closure in it, because this had been looming over me, before his passing. Even, you know what I mean. This is a record I was I was dreading this record since day one practically. And and I'm sure, with Gruesome, there's usually, I don't know if it's equal parts, but for every 5 nice comments you see online, there's definitely going to be the inevitable, "Oh, this fucking sucks." And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people that are like, those drums aren't as good as Human. And let me just fucking beat you all to the punch. I know, but they are 100% real. It is my genuine, 100% effort, and that's something that nobody can take away from me. And I don't really give a shit if you
Right.
think it or not. I know it's genuine, and that to me is something that's sorely missing in modern records. Is just this honesty. And and that's the only thing I will say about computers taking over. Like, when a computer does everything, I don't know, man. A lot of the honesty and integrity goes out the window, because it's the pun intended, I guess, the human element is gone. And it's like that. What's more sincere than a human element? We're all humans, and when a machine takes over, then it's you know it's You know, it's more, he's more machine than man now, I'm afraid. So
Yeah, and I think when it comes to that topic, and then I got something else I want to jump to that you had touched on. When it comes to that topic, the one thing that I think technology eliminates is the one thing that makes music so amazing in the first place, and that's emotion. And emotion, if and it sounds funny coming from the most extreme style of music that there is
yeah,
really with death
death
metal,
metal is
but
highly emotional.
right.
I hate that people think of it as this barbaric thing. I mean, death metal, it connects with people in a way that, dude, I don't see very many other styles of music do it. But go ahead, finish your thought. Sorry.
But yeah, no, it's basically that. Like I think people get so into the processing aspect of it that it is the little idiosyncrasies and the human nature and the emotion that goes into things, that's what made this genre to begin with, that it was raw. It had that
I mean,
life to it. And
I have this whole psychological theory, and and not to get super into that subject. I don't know if you want to get into that subject, but I've been fairly open about my struggles with the metal community. And as a person that's survived some shit and has dealt with it professionally with a doctor for 5 years, I've learned a tremendous amount about human psychology. And I would wager my entire career on the fact that a giant percentage of people that listen to this genre in particular suffer from some sort of mental issue. And the reason being, I think that is a couple of reasons. Number one, the level at which they connect to the music. It's something that you don't see in very many other styles of music. You know what I mean? Like, it's just this super, you know, to be cheesy about it, but like the music, this record saved my life. Like, I think a lot of metal fans feel that way, honestly. And
I would say you're 100% right. I think that's probably a big bait for a lot of people, especially it happens to the vast majority of people, it seems like, in your teenage years when you're kind of learning how to cope with stress, you're learning how to cope with change, you're learning how to cope with peer pressure, all this stuff. And I would bet you're right on the head with that, as far as saying each one of us has a record that changed you in ways that you can't explain, or saved you from falling off the edge in some way or another. And it's the one thing too, like you explain it well when you talk about Sean, but the kid who doesn't get to meet anybody, the kid who is a fan, and he is still his life changed by music. I mean, I think so many
well, this
musicians
is
who
why, like,
have
when people like Eddie Van Halen pass away and Neil Peart pass away, and for me, Jeff Hanneman and Chuck Schuldiner, these
Mhm,
people that you've never met, but they so profoundly affected your life that their passing leaves a hole in you.
right.
Uh, people that play an instrument, I feel like, and again, obviously, this isn't you know, a, a, a blanket statement, but I feel like if you allow an instrument and music to occupy a huge amount of real estate in your mind and in your soul, so to speak, it's because there's some kind of hole there.
Mhm.
And this thing that you use to fill that hole is become so huge to you because it made you finally feel alive or feel something. Um, you know, I see it all the time on this, on with in particular, playing with Left to Die. You know what I mean? When you're playing a record that's been around for almost 40 years, and night after night I see, and Matt and I don't really get the receiving end of this, I see people come up to Rick and Terry in particular and just be like, dude, if I wouldn't have heard Leprosy in 1988, I wouldn't be here today. Like, and they're almost tearing up, and you see it a lot. Um, to witness firsthand the connection that people make to this, and death metal, let's be frank, is fucking horrible music. If you played, the song Leprosy for 1,000 people, I'm going to say 900 and fucking 92 of them are going to be like, what is this shit? It's very abrasive. I mean, it's like a horror movie. If you were to sit
Sure.
down and, make 200 people watch Terrifier, 193 of them would walk out and be like, what was that garbage? It's very intense, very visceral. And, it's hard for people to understand this, but I just had a conversation with my own mother the other day, who's extremely religious. And I was like, you have no idea. This music is more positive than any gospel. Like, this music helps people. It means so much to so many. And, whether you think it's this ugly music or not, you cannot deny how positively impacts thousands and thousands of people all over this planet. Like, thousands of people can't be wrong. This music has a positive effect. I mean, how many fucking horrible fights have you seen break out at a death metal show? I literally can't think of one.
Mm. I can think of plenty at other shows I've gone to. I've tried to explain that to my wife a million times. Like, you get this preconceived notion of what she thinks is just a bunch of meatheads jamming in a circle trying to kill each other, and it's like, well, you know, I can see that, but at the same time, it's the first guy to pick you up when you fall down, and that's the brotherhood of what metal is. And from an outside perspective, I don't think people get it. And it is kind of an exclusive connection type of
I
club.
mean,
Like, you either
if
feel it or
you walk into a 7-Eleven and you're wearing a Slayer shirt and you see somebody across the way and they're wearing a Deicide shirt, you're like, I don't know you, but we're bros.
yeah, we got something in
Like,
common.
right out the gate. What I love about it is it transcends politics, it transcends fucking religion. Doesn't matter. As long as you don't fucking bring that shit up, we're cool. I mean, I play in a band with, guys that have very opposing political beliefs, and dude, get along thick as thieves. We're bros. It's like it's a unifying thing. And, all it takes is for, one person to bring up like Rain and Blood. Oh man, I fucking love Rain and Blood, whatever, or you just start talking about this guitar player or this guitar or this drummer or this snare drum or this record or whatever. Like, we can nerd out on the subject of metal forever
Right.
because it means that much to us and it has affected our lives positively. Those of us that have been in the game a long time now, I'm on, when the hell did I start listening to metal? I'm gonna say like 1987. I
I
don't know
can
how long that was, but
I
that's a
could
long
tell you
time.
my first indoctrination to metal, and I think yours is probably going to be, I would bet, maybe even the same band. Um, for me, it was 1984. It was my birthday, and my brother took me to Disc Jockey in the mall and said, "Pick out any tape you want." So I obviously bought the tape by the artwork, and it was a couple zombies in a graveyard, and it was Slayer Live on Dead, and that was one of those huge pivotal. Like, I was into Iron Maiden, and I was into a lot of the Priest and a lot of the typical classic metal stuff. And then when I heard that, I was like, it just changed my whole perspective on what was possible. And I back then, as I started playing drums when I was 9, and I played from the time I was 9 till I was 16, and that's all I did every day was played along to that tape. And something about Slayer just connected with me, and what was your first like stepping,
I mean, almost an exact story. I mean, I was listening to even Metallica. I was listening to Twisted Sister. I was into Wasp at the time. And I remember this kid Anthony at school came up to us, and he was like the older kid, and he's like, "Listen, this is the '80s." So he's like, "You faggots better stop listening to this pussy shit and go get a cassette from a band called fucking Slayer." We're like these little kids, and we're like, "Oh shit, man!" Anthony was like the elder metalhead statesman for us at school. Like when he
Mhm.
spoke, like listen. So we went to the mall, same thing, and my mother had given us each $5 to get a slice of pizza and a soda, and we put our fucking $5 together, and we bought Rain and Blood, which was still in the new release bin. We just bought the most recent Slayer record.
Mhm.
I to this day still remember we went home, and it was my brother Hector, me, and our friend Sean, and we pressed play, and we did not speak for the next 28 minutes and like 43 seconds or whatever that record is. We just couldn't talk. We just sat there and stared.
Yeah.
And I'd say to this day, 28 minutes later, my life, the path of the course of my life had changed.
I
I
would
don't know.
agree.
I don't know how or why, but I just knew. I don't know what I just heard, but I know I want to play guitar, and I know I want to. Everything else now sucks. Metallica sucks. Twisted Sister sucks. Wasp sucks. Megadeth sucks. If it's not as brutal as this, I don't want to hear. And then that's when I got into Dark Angel big time. I got into Creator big time. You know, Several months later, this kid Rob Watson at school has this cassette from this crazy band called Death, and I was just like, damn, that's what they're called, just Death. And it was Scream Bloody Gore, and it was another similar moment. I just remember putting the Walkman on in front of school and press play on that cassette, and I just couldn't fucking believe what I was hearing. It was like the chorus of Pleasure to Kill and Hell Awaits the whole time. You know,
Mhm.
I ate it up hook, line, and sinker. And I think that's kind of like this line in the sand for guys like us to do the extreme thing. A lot of people that were into, even Master of Puppets and shit, heard Rain and Blood and like, that's a bridge too far for me. Whereas I heard it, and I couldn't get enough of that aggression, of that speed, of that, just the anger in there. Like and I grew up with a lot of violence, so it's just like I feel like it just, you fear this monster, and then when you're like, oh, I can become the monster, hell yeah, I can own my fear and take control of it. And I think that's what extreme music really kind of is it allows you, you know to sort of inhabit that monster kind of thing. And you are now the one that people listen to and they're afraid of, and there's like a bit of power in that.
Yeah, I think for me, Slayer was for I think for it's one or the other. I think when you get into Slayer from South of Heaven backwards, is it when you ran into that you were either like, okay, this is my limit, this is as far as I can push it, or it was for guys like I think you and I, it was the beginning of the journey. So it
Total.
was now it was the hunt for things that push the envelope farther every single time, that it led from that to Napalm Death to Carcass to these other bands that were just pushing the envelope as far as possible. And that 100% for me, like when I got into that, it was like now I'm looking for all these album covers that have the gnarliest shit humanly possible on it, finding Venom to, j- every envelope of metal. It was
Yeah, I think we were fortunate. If you talk to a kid Which again, with this Left to Die thing, what's been really cool to experience with that band in particular is the amount of young people that come to these gigs are like, dude, I wasn't even born till 2000 or 1996 or whatever the age is. Like, and they look at guys like us that experience that mid to late 80s to early 90s just metal boom experience, like that succession of records. I remember, like, then Leprosy came out the next year, and then I heard Slowly Rot, and then I heard Consuming Impulse, and then came that earache boom with Carcass and Napalm, and and you're like, holy shit, what's a blast beat? Oh my god, it's like Slayer on crack. Like,
Mm,
I couldn't get enough of all of that shit. I mean, I
yeah.
remember buying the first Deicide record, and I was like, oh my god, I don't really believe in demons and shit, but I think there's one in my house now.
Yeah, it was it was the same thing. I whenever the discussion gets brought up, I think we're um incredibly blessed to have been through
Yeah.
the birth of all that stuff. 'Cause it's there'll never be another time like it, and it's how influential it was, and again how I think how many all the positive life changes that came of it from so many people, driving people into music. It's back in that time, it seemed like every other person you talked to was involved in music somehow, you know.
Well, I think therein lies another really cool point to bring up about metal in particular is, I think it's an interesting genre because it positively moves so many of us to no longer be bystanders. We now wanted to pick up a drum set or a guitar or a bass guitar or a microphone. I want to be part of this. I want to make my own shit now.
Right.
And what other I used to have this conversation with my drum endorsers, and they'd be giving drum sets away to like whatever the drummer of like whatever pop band was the biggest at the time. And I'm like, how many people, even though they're filling an arena, how many people are walking out of that arena like, oh, I want to play drums now?
Hmm.
I would wager that, you know, at least a similar number, if I think more, but if there's 350 people watching a death metal band, shit, dude, I'd say 200 of them play an instrument
Of some form, I would agree.
of
I would
some
agree.
form.
And maybe that's why this type of music has that solid, obviously it's ebb and flowed with popularity, going show attendance and sales and whatnot. But I think the connection has always been there, from the early days of thrash to now. And that probably has a huge part of the reasoning is that a lot of the fan base is a musician on some level. So the connectivity is so much greater that you can sit and watch a band and analyze a band and take home more of the show.
Well, and I think and that goes back to why this music means so much to so many of us. I mean, for me in particular, it really, one of the things that I've been trying to be better at for myself in life is stopping to smell the roses, you know, so to speak. And I think, oftentimes I'm consciously aware that, like, holy shit, I'm in Bangkok, Thailand, playing Leprosy, the album that, you know, changed, helped change the course of my life. Like, I owe so much to Chuck and these people and Rick and Terry and Bill Andrews and, Dave Lombardo and Jeff like all those that came before me that pushed me into this life I've had. And I'm just forever indebted to them. And it's something that when I meet fans and you know I always make sure I stress a point to say to them, like, dude, I'm a I'm a fan, same as you. I'm fortunate that I'm the guy on stage playing these tunes, but I'm here in celebration of all of this, same as you. So we kind of are on the same. I'm no better than you are. You know what I mean? I
Right.
put
Right.
time and I put in the effort, and I don't discount any of that. I definitely have paid my dues, but I'm no better than anybody in that crowd. And furthermore, I always make it a point to never forget, like, hey, dude, if it wasn't for you people coming to these shows, this wouldn't happen. So,
Right.
whenever I see someone being a dick to a fan, I'm just like, get the fuck over yourself, man. Like, if you had no fans, you'd be some asshole in your room.
Right. Thanks for checking out this episode of the Growl Podcast. If you enjoy all things metal, please help yourself out and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments for any of our guests or myself, please feel free to leave them below, and we will try to address each and every one of them. Like these videos, share these videos, and help spread the word of the Growl. So, um, obviously, you're known a lot for your drumming and the bands that you drum in, but as you mentioned earlier, you're very much a multi-instrumentalist, and you got several other projects going. Fill me in on what all you. I mean, I know you had the Create a Kill, and you had um, what Kill Division.
Yeah, so Create a Kill was, that was just kind of like a one-off thrash record. I wish I had the time to do another one. You know, I'd love to just take a guitar, tune it to E flat, and just write a bunch of thrash riffs. I don't have time. I just recorded guitars for the next Kill Division record, which I'm, at this point, much at like my wife has been telling me, she's like, you need to start picking and choosing what you do so you can dedicate more time. And I agree with her. So I just finished guitars and for a new Kill Division record, which I'm gonna guess I'm saying now it'll be the last record we do, just because I don't, I need to focus on, Gruesome as a record coming out in June that I definitely need to, we're going to be touring on that, and I'm going to be just doing a lot of that. Left to Die will obviously continue playing shows. Um, and then I play guitar in a Depeche Mode, you know, like a heavy, you know, melodic metal version of Depeche Mode, which I fucking love doing that. So I'm going to focus on that. And then I have this other band that I can't even talk about yet. Because I got hired by a big corporation to put a band together and work with a record company and blah 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 blah. Um, and just the other day, like, I thought it was just an album and maybe like a show, but now they're talking about doing a tour. So I'm sure I if that happens, I got to definitely give that some precedence in my life, or not precedence, preference. Um, so I feel like if I can do two bands on drums and two bands on guitar, like, I think that's more than enough for me to, just, that will occupy an entire year of my life easily.
Right.
Uh, and I'm very super grateful and fortunate to be in that position. Like sometimes I'll, we all bitch and moan, and I'm like, man, I wish I was in one band that was like big enough that I could just tour with that and not have to come home and play a fucking million gigs. But obviously that's like, very hard to achieve playing the kind of music we play. And I'm more than fortunate and grateful for what I do have, and what I do get to do. So I'm just super grateful. Like, I think I'm at this stage in my life where at damn near 50 years old, to be touring more than I ever have, and playing the kind of songs that I'm playing shit, dude, like it's just been amazing to me. Like it's been amazing. Like Left to Die, we're going back to Europe in September. We leave on my birthday, and we're playing all of Scream Bloody Gore in its entirety. Like, fuck, how sick is
Nice.
that?
That's a pretty good birthday present.
I mean, and going back to our conversation, like, that was the first death record I ever heard. And fun little story, like we were just in Australia, and they were hit with a hurricane or a cyclone, as they call them over there. And so we had a show cancel, and the promoter was like, hey, let's do a free show in Sydney, in this like little place that holds maybe 150 people tops. And I think therein lies, like, all of us in Left to Die, we consider ourselves like we're the blue collar, we're the blue collar death.
Right.
And we were just like, yeah, dude, let's do it, man. And we played in this little place, um, you know, small stage, people, pay fucking hanging off the ceiling, people. It was nuts. And we played only Scream Bloody Gore songs, dude. And god damn if that wasn't the best show of the tour. And just and it was interesting because literally across the street, Baby Metal was playing. And we're there, and there's a fucking line out the door around the building, and you're just looking out there, and you're just like, and not to, I'm not gonna, talk shit about Baby Metal, but I don't know. To me, it's very dishonest music. Like they just plucked these, and I guess they rotate the girls, and when one of them looks like she's actually like old enough to have hair down there, they get rid of her because the pet, whatever. um they just like they get these girls in and out, and
Mhm.
somebody's playing the band, whatever. To me, that's just, I don't know, that seems manufactured and dishonest. So to me, it was this interesting juxtaposition of like, we're literally across the street from just what I feel like is just fake bullshit, and we're in this little club ripping through, you know, death metal in its most pure form. Just Scream Bloody Gore, no triggers on the kicks, just fucking drums, two guitar amps, and a bass rig. Like fucking the way it was. And dude, if that's not, if I'll remember that gig the rest of my life.
It's funny how that
That was,
works sometimes, when for a situation like that, even to where nothing turns into something so memorable,
um
because it's kind of grassroots.
I just think about people in like Sydney, Australia, talking about, dude, I saw Left to Die, which obviously, yeah, the big ticket items there are Rick Ross and Terry Butler, and those guys fucking played all of Scream, not all of Scream Bloody Gore. We did, I think, like seven of 10 songs, and I think we did the song Left to Die and Pull the Plug, um, and so short set, ripping, and it's like if you were there, you were there.
Right.
Like I do. Listen to this crazy story. I saw Slayer in 1996. Same shit in a little tiny club in Miami in South Beach. That was like this private show that I happened to get a flyer for. I don't even know fucking how. I must have been on some kind of mailing list. And I even thought it was fake. Drive all the way down to Miami, and we walk in, and there's a double bass Tama drum kit in Marshall Stacks, and I was like, "Holy shit, we're about to see Slayer in a tiny club."
Right.
And I remember that gig till the day I die. I was
That's
there.
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I've got one show like that. We played with Carcass up in Minneapolis, and Walker did not get his visa to pass through, so they played the whole entire set with no singer, no bass player. And I'll tell you, you think like, okay, that's going to be just kind of disappointing, but I'll tell you what, the guitar tone,
I was
and
about to say, no, Carcass to me is the kind
it's
of band that is so there's so much going on with great riffs and great
Oh,
guitar
it
solos
was
and just
so
strong.
devastating, just crushing because it was like
Man,
everyone was like a zombie just standing there watching because the guitars were just like
that
you'd hear things
rule.
that you never would really get to focus on. So it again, another one of those situations where they're like, "Oh, it's gonna suck" or whatever. I'm like, "Well, it's not gonna suck. You're gonna make it good. You know, it's gonna be what it is." And
Yeah,
we were talking,
that's awesome
and
story.
it was yeah, it was. I mean, I've seen him a handful of times, and it was the most memorable time I've seen him, just because it was different and unique. You know.
Right, totally, man. Fuck, that's
So
killer. Dude.
yeah.
Here's a
So
here's a
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was about ready to change the subject, so I want you to touch on what you're going to say
No,
here.
I was just going to tell you a fun little story. When we were in Bangkok just now, Michael Amott lives there,
Okay, yeah.
and so he came out to the gig, and he's wearing a spiritual healing. What I it looked to me to be this like original tour shirt. I was like, dude, is that an original tour shirt? And he goes, I was on this tour. Carcass opened up, and I was like, oh shit, man, like. That was his first tour. Like, as he was just like, I was like this little fucking kid in America. Like, unbelievable.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So, going to go back a ways. I just don't know how far it's going to go, and it's off topic of music. So, I know skating is a big part of your personality. How big a part was that in your childhood growing up?
You know, man, it's very interesting. It was a huge part of my childhood, and I've had this conversation. A good buddy of mine is this guy Sam Hitz. He's a pro writer for Creature. Um, you know, I think psychologically, if you profiled a 14-year-old skater kid and a 14-year-old metalhead kid, they check off so many of the same boxes.
Yep.
Skateboarding, especially in the 80s, skateboarding, there was no fucking skate stores in the mall. It wasn't like, it was counterculture, and there was individuality, and you could find your own sense of self in this, kind of misfit community. And, man, I fucking love skateboarding in the 80s. It was just such a magical time for that. And yeah, a massive part of my childhood. And I think the reason I stopped skateboarding is, back in those days in South Florida where I grew up, there was no ramps, there was no skate parks, there was no bowls. We got sick and tired of stealing wood and building ramps and cops breaking it down. And then at that point, I think by 86, 87, I'd started playing guitar, and I just sort of focused more on guitar. And, I think sometime maybe 10, 12, 13 plus years ago now, I'm not sure. In my mid 30s, at some point, I was driving to a gig during the day. It was like a happy hour gig. And I saw a mini ramp like in a park. And I went, what the fuck? And I even looped around and I drove past it again. I was like, dude, that's a fucking mini ramp. And the technology had moved up enough that I could go on my phone and search skate parks near me, and I had no idea that skate parks had become a thing. I probably had several drinks later that night and ordered a skateboard off Amazon that I didn't even remember it showing. Like, I don't even remember it doing it. Showed up, and I just reconnected with something that I loved as a kid. And I to this day, I fucking skateboarded today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I
Fucking
think
love.
a lot of that, finding a way to stay young. When I mean, it's difficult. Just aging.
Well, right. So I have to, advocate. I skate within my age means, so to,
Right.
like I don't. I'm not ollieing off 8 stair fucking wells and all that. Like, luckily by my house, there's like a cool skate park. It has like a mini ramp slash half bowl. So I just kind of ride the bowl and skate the mini ramp, and If I'm rolling on a skateboard and dropping it on a ramp, like that's good enough for me, man.
Yeah,
I
and
don't need
I think
chairs.
physically is one thing. Like the physical activity is obviously good, but like mentally and spiritually, something that just keeps that youth alive in your head. I think
Yes,
music does it for sure, but I think the skateboarding from that culture, even BMX bikes for a lot of guys
same
is that
shit.
a portion of that where it just keeps you in your mind a little more nimble, I
Well,
think,
I
and
think,
youthful.
especially guys like us that play this particular genre. I mean, let's be honest, death metal is a very adolescent kind of music. Like it's like we write ridiculous lyrics about ridiculous shit. And I mean, sometimes, I think Chuck was kind of the first one on particular human where he started writing some real shit. You're like thought provoking, like, oh man, you can really say more than just, you know, shit, fuck guts, Um, and with Kill Division, honestly, like I actually get to write, you know, really time specific shit. Even the band's name, really, it's Kill Division. My whole thing, not to get into that super deep, but I just wish that Americans would just drop the fucking bullshit about politics and just remember that we're all Americans. And fuck's sake, dude, it's like we're all here. Like,
Yeah,
shut
it's
up and
been tough, man. I agree with you. I mean, everyone's got their opinion and their stance on stuff, but it's like to the level
I
of separation that it's driven
my
is almost
anger
mind-boggling.
my anger is mainly driven by, I guess politically, if I'm going to just say, like, I'm a pretty centrist guy. I see both sides of it, and I agree with some shit here and I agree with some shit there. And I feel like balance is kind of the way to do it. And what makes me fucking furious is these bubbles. And it's like this side has their bubble, and they'll take this story, this news piece, and turn it into what they want you to be angry about. And then
Mm,
the other side will run the same exact story, but they'll spin it to where it makes you angry at the side they want you to be angry. So I feel like we're purposely being divided because, divide and conquer. Because if we start talking to each other and we go, wait a minute, holy shit, these corporations are all fucking us all, then they're in trouble. Because
right.
then we unite and
We
then
have
we
more in
start,
common than yeah, we all have more in
you know,
common than we do in difference, I
we
think.
certainly do it. Again, like, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but I play in a band, with people who are on opposite ends of that spectrum. And dude, we get along like fucking bros. And again, like I honestly believe that if you would just fucking turn off the cable fucking news and just start talking to your people, you'd be like, shit, man, we're a lot more alike than I thought we were.
Yep, I
Fuck's
think
sake.
too, when you can do that, you can also learn to just turn it off, and not just the TV, not just the social media, not just any of that, but say you and I are having a discussion and I say something that you don't agree with, to or let's flip that around. You say something I don't agree with. I don't have to dig into you about it. I can easily just at the same point just be like, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. We don't have to go to war over it.
I mean, my
You know
thing
what I
with
mean? That
politics,
it,
at the end of the day, first off, you really don't have much control over it unless you're, you know, donating millions to someone's campaign. They don't give a fuck about you. So
no,
why don't we all just actually get along and unite a little bit? And and a difference of opinion should be a thing where, like, if you tell me that you think pineapple is fucking normal on a pizza, I think you're fucking crazy. But you know, I don't give a shit. Like, cool.
that's exactly where I'm at.
I'm not
Yeah.
putting pineapple on my pizza, but you go ahead. I don't care.
You do you, man.
Right.
Yeah, I've always been that way to where, I don't have to agree and you don't have to agree. And I just don't care, man. I'd rather spend time figuring what we do have in common than what we don't.
I mean, I'd
Because
rather argue about Is Seven Churches the first death metal record, or Scream Bloody Gore the first death metal record? I'll fight somebody over that shit.
Yep. So I'm going to kind of touch on something that I know is uh, very heartfelt to you, very deep for you, and I'll leave it up to you on how much you wanted to discuss it and to talk about it. But I know you went through a very very dark period in your life not too long ago. Back, if I recall correctly, in July of 2019.
Yeah.
Um, I know I've had, and I think we all have had friends or loved ones who have gone into those dark places. Some find a way and some don't.
Yeah.
And I am, um, I'm happy you found a way.
Thank you.
And maybe if you kind of want to discuss a little bit of that, I'm going to leave it up to you because know it's very personal and probably a very sensitive issue for you.
I mean, the one thing about it that I will say bothers me is, again, you know, I'll give you another fact why I'm convinced so many of us have these problems. I'll give you two facts. Fact number one, there's a subgenre called fucking doom metal. The whole goddamn thing is about depression and suicide. Don't tell me you listen to that shit and don't have problems. And the other thing is when I wrote a piece for Decibel magazine, and when it came out, for days, I got hundreds of messages, fucking hundreds, overwhelming. And I remember kind of thinking to myself, messages from dudes we all know that play in big fucking bands. And I remember thinking to myself, then why am I the only one speaking out? Because if more people were aware just how goddamn common this is, you wouldn't feel so alone, and you would feel at least a modicum of hope. Like, oh, the guy from one of my favorite bands has similar struggles that I do. Fuck, I don't feel so isolated now. And I got to tell you, dude, every single time we hear of a suicide, um, I came close enough that I'm only here because I was interrupted. I had no intention of stopping. Um, I know what those final thoughts are. And to be 5 years from that now, um, I fucking wish I could be there and just be like, dude, stop, stop, stop. I know it fucking sucks right now. And you do have to put in effort, man. You do. I got to tell you, this thing about dudes in particular about, we don't show our emotions and it's tough to not show emotions. I'll tell you something, man, there's nothing more fucking tough and manly than looking in the fucking mirror and being honest with yourself. And, I had to deal with and face some fucking super horrible shit. But if I wouldn't have done it, I wouldn't have survived. And, a lot of people doing that kind of work is incredibly difficult. Like my therapist actually kind of gave me a statistic, and she's like, most of my patients will not see me after about the sixth therapy session because you peel back so many layers of that onion and you get to the real root of your problems, and most people don't want to face it.
Right.
Um, and it's fucking horrible. I won't sugarcoat it to anybody. It's fucking horrible. If you were abused, if a lot of women were raped, like, if horrible shit happened to you early in life, which is, often the case, looking at that as an adult is the fucking worst. Um, but I can tell you that if you do it, and no one's ever going to look at me and be like, man, that Gus guy is a fucking ball of sunshine. I'm still the same person. I would, most people would characterize me as, I'm very introverted. I'm, fairly melancholic. Um, but I have no fucking desire to die. Like, funny side story, like I became aware of flying because I was like, holy shit, I've been through all this shit, man. I don't want a fucking plane to crash on. I got a reason to live. I want to fucking live.
Mm-hmm.
It was a new, quite honestly, a new feeling for me. Um, I wrote a follow up in Decibel, I think like a year or two later. I don't remember when it was, but it was like when the Left to Die tour was announced, and I was just like, dude, you know, I'm playing Leprosy with Rick Ross and fucking Terry Butler. Like, dreamt of this my whole life, and I was going to erase all of it. And even now, um, you know, full disclosure, I'm in therapy. I still see my therapist every week, and right now I'm dealing with the fallout of that, like something I didn't even see coming, the guilt and shame of knowing I attempted suicide. It's fucking horrible. Like, I took a family picture with my family at Christmas time last year, and I looked at it and I just saw myself disappearing from it. And I was just like, God damn, the shit I would have put these people through. Um, which was I realized, holy shit, I have a lot of shame and guilt about this. And I'm working through it, and I know I'll eventually come out the other side, and I can consciously now say I was incredibly ill, and depression is the great deceiver. And when you're mentally ill, your mind will try to convince you of things that are not true. And I just wish I could, honestly, I wish I was like a more famous dude, because we as a society have this thing where, like, if a no-name person tells you a suicide survival story, it just, people forget about it, the next day. But if a celebrity were to come out and be like, I attempted suicide, then all of a sudden, it's Suicide Awareness Month and everybody gives a shit. And I'm a realist. I realize, like, I haven't, told you this, like, of all the guys that play drums in death metal bands, I'm on a scale of fame, I'm in the top 50, 100, I don't even know. But, you know, I guess my point is, I wish I had a bigger voice, because I really would like to reach more people about this subject. Recently, a friend of mine confided in me that their brother had recently committed suicide. And I felt this immediate and incredibly unique ability to help him with his guilt, because I feel like, speak on behalf of the dead, because I was there. And in those final moments, you're not thinking, oh, such and such person failed me. That you don't, if you have a loved one that that committed suicide, it's not your fault. And I spoke to him, and I don't know if I helped him or not, because obviously that's like a big ticket item. But I did feel this sense of, like, I could say to him, hey, listen, man, wasn't your fault. Like, this wasn't on you. I can tell you what goes through your mind as you're ready to end your life. In my case, I was just convinced that there was a 0% chance of achieving any sort of joy in life, and there was just no reason to live. Um, which I would suspect is kind of the going thought when you're in it. Um, and I just wish I could reach more people and be like, you're gonna have to do some shitty work. You're gonna have to talk to somebody, and you're gonna have to deal with some super shitty feelings. But if you're fucking strong enough, most things that, especially things that happen to us as kids, it's not your fucking fault. And there's no reason you should carry that weight. into your adult life. And most of us do. Most of us do.
To interject here on something for a second, and not to obviously try to tell you to think one way or another, but even if you help one person, even if you help one person and help one other person who then helps one person, that's a ripple that is very important.
Now, I can tell
And
you what
just your ability to talk about it is probably greater than most. So, I mean, I would, in that sense, I would be pretty proud of where you're at in that regard. You know what I'm saying? That you probably have touched people.
well, I know, when I received those hundreds of messages, I can tell you 17 of them I read, I could read between the lines. And 17 of those, all of those, just I remember just fucking scrolling page after page after page of these messages. And I read them all. 17 of them were people saying something to the effect of, I read this at exactly the right time. Thank you.
That's huge.
And, if I saved one life, then it was worth all the, because full disclosure, there's a tremendous amount of discomfort speaking about this. There's a huge stigma. I remember when the article came out, I was like, what the fuck did I just do? I just let the whole fucking world know I'm insane, that I'm fucked up, that I was abused as a kid. Like, I just was like, what the fuck? And, and it's certainly not a cheery subject, but I just felt this need, like, God damn it, someone's got to say something.
Hmm.
Like, and this was just, right when that first article came out, this was like a year post pandemic. Like, fucking suicide rates were through the goddamn roof.
Yes, they were.
And, and look at my January 2020. I had just attempted suicide 4 months prior. My best fucking friend in the world passed away. And, my whole music career just evaporated. Fuck. You know, I had, at the time, I still had my gun confiscated, so I didn't have a gun. Um, that's how bad I was. I had my fucking gun confiscated. And that right there, that tone you just heard, that's shame talking. Um, because I still feel like fuck, man. Like, that's how bad I was.
Hmm.
Um, and I came out the other side, man. Put in the work, kept talking to my therapist, and there's a line in a tape read song that I literally live my life by. And it's, truth is hard to stomach when you feed yourself lies. And there's no more power, in my opinion, than to be honest with yourself.
Right.
And you're going to get nowhere in life if you're fucking feeding yourself bullshit. And, I just am one of those people that I try to be as unbelievably tethered to reality as I can. Even like, when it comes to talking about this kind of stuff, like, yeah, it sounds funny to say, and obviously there's a whole history there, but there's two guys, and I even feel weird saying this kind of stuff, but there's two drummers on this planet that are officially, playing death songs, me and Gene Hoglan.
Hmm.
And, the popularity disparage between him and I is huge. And of course, he's fucking Gene Hoglan. The guy played with Dark Angel, Death, it's
Testament. Yeah. The
Testament.
list.
Obviously, the guy's got the credentials, and he's a fantastic fucking drummer. You know, I've done a few things. I play with some bands. Um, and there's times there's times I feel like it's still a complete unknown. Um, but I don't play this kind of music for, to be famous. I don't think I don't think any of us would. There's no such thing, in my opinion. There's no such thing as a fucking rock star that plays death metal. None of us are rock stars, but certainly within the community, there's people that are more obscure than others. I think of myself as, you know, people know me, but no one, in other words, I'll really, I can confidently say that if I couldn't play drums and left to die anymore, or Gruesome, both bands would continue just fine. They'd just get somebody else and nobody would give a shit.
Well, I think you might be a little off there to a certain degree,
Oh,
and that
not that,
probably
no,
comes
not,
from just being humble to a degree, right? And I
well,
think
no, I think, it is and it isn't. I think there's very few bands where the drummer, and this is just a person that plays all the instruments, the drummer oftentimes, and this is, I feel like, irrefutable, the most, and maybe the bass player, but, you know, the guy that writes the songs and the guy that fucking sings the songs are the two most important dudes in the public eye. And I think most guys that play drums, at least most drummers I know, they play the instrument because they fucking love playing drums. And I love playing drums. Actually, just recently, in the last week, I called my buddy Seth, a great guitar player buddy of mine. I was like, man, let's just start fucking jamming. I want to keep my chops up, and I want to just reconnect with just playing drums for sheer enjoyment, not because there's a tour or a record. Like, just go to my studio and just fucking enjoy playing drums. And I've done that 3 times in the last week, and I actually find myself wanting to call him and be like, yo, let's go jam.
right,
And it's, dude, honestly, since Sean passed away, 5 years now, it's been that I haven't really felt that. Even to this day, playing drums was just kind of this thing where, like, I did it almost because I had to. And now, I don't know, like, this Gruesome record finally coming out, and me having this renewed sense of, like, feeling gratitude. Like, how fucking fortunate have I been with this instrument, the drums in particular? Like, meeting Dave Koros as a 17-year-old kid. And then I meet Sean Reinert the next year. And these are the guys that teach me. And then I join Malevolent Creation. And then I go on tour, and then I meet all these other dudes, and they all were my heroes, and now they're like buddies of mine. And, I'm buddies with, these amazing world-class drummers, and I can lean on all of them for guidance and friendship and camaraderie and all this stuff. Like, damn, dude, as a drummer, I have been so fucking fortunate. And finding the gratitude in that, finding the gratitude in whatever you have going on in life, I think, is a very, for some of us, it takes a very conscious effort to recognize it. And, like, it's almost like the opposite of putting your face in the shit. Like, you're putting your face in that flower and going, no, smell that rose, dude. It's actually pretty good. Things aren't so bad.
right. And
And
yeah, just to be, I mean, you're kind of hitting it right on the head, and you think about how many people would just absolutely give everything they have to have a moment of that. But when you're
dude,
living it, to stop and breathe it in.
I've had this conversation, shit, even with the guys in my band. You're on tour, and, especially like South American tours where you're catching a plane every day, and you're like, man, you just got back to the hotel. It's fucking midnight. You have to take a shower, and you have to try to sleep for like 2 hours because lobby calls at 5 a.m. and you got to catch another flight, and blah, 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 blah. But, it's like you're in that moment. You're so fucking tired. You're beat up. And then you think about, man, the guy in the local band that has been waiting for months and months and months just to play a show with you.
Yeah.
Like, and you're the guy in the position where like they're just so excited to be in on the sharing a stage with your band. God damn, man, what a fucking gift for me to have experienced that in my lifetime. And how blessed was I that my first tour was with Malevolent fucking Creation, one of my favorite goddamn bands. Like, I'm on stage playing some of my favorite fucking songs, and that's my first tour experience. Shit, man. I've been a lucky fucker, dude. And all of these things, dude, believe me, these things all swirl around. And I think about that dude I was on that day with a gun to my head, and none of that mattered. All I saw was black, and I just wanted to fucking die. Man, much how I lament the kid that I was, and I have a lot of sadness for that kid because my childhood fucking sucked. I have a similar sense of sadness for that dude I was 5 years ago because that dude was so misguided and so fucked up and so wrong. Um, you know, it just took a lot of work to realize it all, and it takes the work,
Right.
and it continues to take the work. I mean, uh, again, like it's not like mental illness isn't. There's no cure. You just minimize the effects of it. So I still, suffer with depression and anxiety. I just learned to, you know, have it more under control than I ever have. And, so for me to smell that rose is a thing where I have to push my own head into it and go, no, dude, remember, you're in this great position. You worked for it and you don't take it for granted, but you can enjoy it a little bit. You can take it in, dude. It's okay.
Right. I think you have to. I think it's,
Sure.
no matter how much you're affected by your heart, your more difficult emotions, to taking it for granted is a weird scenario, and I argue this topic with my wife a lot. Taking it for granted is like you just expect it to be there, and when you're working for something that hard, yeah, you kind of expect it to be there because you're working your ass off for it once you have it, but eventually it's all going to go away in some way or another, right? So I don't care what your talent or your hobby set is or your skill set is, eventually you're not going to be able to do that. So I think it's pretty cool to hear you talk. I mean, I think 90% of what has come out of your mouth here is stuff that probably couldn't have come out of your mouth until you hit bottom.
Absolutely not.
So
No,
to do
this is like version 2.0 of me. And it was just, I had to find this person. And, the problem for me and a problem for a lot of people, and in my case, a tumultuous childhood, that version of me was so subdued and just chose to live in a cage. And to this very day, I have to remind myself, dude, get out of that cage. You don't need to be there anymore. And I think so many of us put ourselves in these cages. And, and being out of that cage, I'll be honest with you, is a fucking lot scarier and more vulnerable than being inside that cage. As sad as it sounds, is safe, and it's peaceful and it's quiet. And if something horrible happens, it doesn't affect me because I don't care. And now, yeah, dude, I care. I care about a plane crashing. When I ride my motorcycle, I care. I remember back in the day, I used to ride my motorcycle, and I used to think, I don't give a shit if a fucking truck creams into me. God, do me a favor. I remember having those thoughts, and now, yeah, dude, I don't, I don't want I don't want to get creamed on my motorcycle. I still ride my motorcycle. I don't live in fear. No, and I ride a motorcycle in South Florida, which some people think is nuts, but you know, I, I still live life. I just have a lot more reverence for life, and and I do recognize that, you know, it takes work. In particular, if you've had, you know, some bad luck in life, you know, which wasn't my fault, you
Right.
know.
Well, it's a good story, man. You got a really good story to tell, and I'm I'm uh, I'm thankful that you have taken the time to share because it is very personal, um, and very
I
emotional.
listens to it.
And I think it's as much as I think it seems difficult for you to do that, your desire, I think, as you mentioned earlier, to help others who may battle the same things, it's the only real way you're going to connect to them. And it's the only real way anyone's going to connect to them. I think a lot of these people who have a difficulty need to hear it from someone who walked in those shoes. And you know, I think I would speak for a lot of people in saying that you're a big man for being
I
able to do
appreciate.
those things. And I think you deserve a pat on the back for it because I know it can't be easy to talk about. So um, you
I
know,
just, you know, I don't, you know, I it's that's something I still like. You know, I don't really feel like you know. I guess it's hard for me to think of it that way. I don't, you know, I don't think there's any um like I guess I don't want a pat on my back. I just want to be I just want to be heard, and I want people to listen, and you know, acknowledge, you know, and there's you see this all the time, and you know, especially online when someone's just being a fucking asshole to everybody or whatever. It's like you don't know what someone's going through, man.
exactly. I say that every time that it's like when someone to the simplest things where you know you could probably go through this conversation and pick out five things said and be like that guy's just a jackass, and it's like, you know it's like every single argument in life, like, you don't know what happened to me today, you don't know what I went through today, I don't know what you went through today, so just grain of salt those things and take it easy. Internet talkers
You know,
always drive me
fucking
nuts.
cool, man. Just you know, it's easier to just be cool. It takes effort to be a fucking asshole. It does.
Yeah.
And you know, and again, you know, and you know, when you're on tour and you're fucking beat up and you're tired, and you know, it takes it sometimes it takes more effort than others to just like, man, just fucking be cool.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, you're tired, but you know, that's when, you know, you got to stop yourself. It takes an effort. You got to stop yourself and go, man, you know, I'm in Sydney, Australia. I'm in wherever. It doesn't matter where you are. Like if you're on, dude, I've broken it down to where like, God damn it, if you're above the ground breathing, fucking winning, dude.
Yep,
Like if
that's
you're
a
at
win.
the show, you're playing your goddamn guitar and you're playing a drum set or you're playing, you know, you're goddamn, dude.
You know,
Shit.
I think the older I get, I feel that way more and more every day. I lost my dad 20 years ago already, and
Man,
I'm creeping
sorry to hear.
up on the age that he was already. And sometimes you start thinking closer about, okay, and now I only have this much time. My kids are both teenagers, and pretty soon leaving the nest, and it's like you really start need to focus on how grateful everything is. Like you got up today. There's that's
You know, with
couldn't be a better start.
that
Yeah.
hourglass is tipped over, and I think, you know, it's in this weird, kind of strange way, like me coming as close to death as I did, you know, I where I basically tried to smash the hourglass, even though physically mine is tipped over, in a way I feel like I flipped it back on top, and I'm like, oh no, I'm starting over now.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm just, you know, being great. You know, gratitude goes a long way, humility goes a long way, and just being cool as much as you can to people that you deal with in life, you know, without obviously being a fucking pushover and being taken advantage of. um, that goes a long way too. So,
Right. Right. Well, man, once again, I greatly appreciate your time. I appreciate your
uh,
openness.
thanks for the
And
conversation. It was
yeah,
good to chat, man.
for sure. Well, I will put all the links to all your stuff below here so everyone can kind of make sure they're checking everything out. And
Yeah, and obviously, whenever you edit this or do whatever with it, I'll share it on all my stuff too.
awesome. Sounds great, man. Once again, keep your head up. You're doing amazing work. And I think you're touching more than you think. So um, keep plowing ahead, my friend.
All right, brother. See
Thanks
you,
for
man.
talking. All right. Take care, buddy.